Okay, you can go ahead.
Okay, and good afternoon, and the committee will come back to order from recess. And our second part of the session is with Mike Kane from LBA to talk about where we are in the current budget. And I will turn it right over to Mike.
Hey, thank you very much. I'm going to switch over to share my screen. I should have brought it up in the beginning for those listening, but we did post a copy of this document on the LBA website. If you go under FY 22-23, under operating budgets, there will be a section for presentations. And so I think going forward, that's something we're going to try to do. Any presentations or documents we have with Senate Finance or Ways and Means, we'll make sure that we have them on our website the day prior so that the members of the public can follow. So I'm going to switch over to screen 2 and hit share. Okay, and can you see, it says 20, but can you see the document right now?
Yes, Mike.
Yes.
Okay. So I just wanted to point out the 81.5 is right before the break. That was the estimate of where the CAFR will probably end up in fiscal year 20. Just on the status of the CAFR, they do believe will go to the partners for sign off next week. And then it would be released shortly thereafter. And then the fiscal committee meeting in January, we'll talk to the chairs and the members, but the plan is to have a presentation of the CAFR and the Turnpike and lottery reports on that day as well, but we'll touch base later. So
hey, Mike?
Yes, sorry.
Can you expand that chart at all?
Let's see here.
And Mr. Kane, do you know if we could get hard copies of the CAFR?
I will ask if they have them.
Oh yeah.
Is that much bigger, better?
It's way better for me. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, we will ask for hard copies of the CAFR for the finance. Usually we get hard copies for fiscal, Ways and Means, and finance committee members on both the House and the Senate. So I'll let you know when those will be available. So when we ended 20, right before lunch, 81.5 was the number we had mentioned just to keep an eye on. I'm going to flip to the next page here, and you'll see that now we're in 21. And I just wanted to put 21 in orange just to kind of separate it, because when we do come down to 21 at the end of the year, we can see the potential deficit that the state's looking at. So we know preliminary estimates. When the budget was passed back in September of 19, the plan was that $27.1 million in a positive would be carried forward from 20 into 21, and that would allow for a balanced budget at the end of the biennium. We know that didn't happen. We know that the preliminary estimate is a negative $54.4 million deficit. So coming over, you'll see the beginning balance potentially negative 54.4. However, that's a swing of $81.5 million. And because the budget was built assuming a balance forward of 27.1, the 81.5 is really the number the committee should focus on. As far as estimated revenue, general and education trust fund, the current plan is about $2,656 million for 21. And this is a schedule that we'll update once the monthly revenue focuses are released. It's a number that's going to change regularly. We know through November that the state is $44.3 million above plan. And again, it's unfortunately probably over a quarter of our revenue does come in March and April. So until we see those returns, it's hard to really count on this money, but just for a kind of a point in time snapshot, even with moving money back to 20 from 21, the state is still $44.3 million up through November. And so I know Senate Ways and Means had a meeting yesterday with DRA, and DRA was doing additional research into the reason for this variance. I know they did mention that your large businesses, your box stores, and your kind of your home improvement stores have been doing well through the pandemic. We do know that the top 10, I think it's like the top 10 taxpayers pay almost 45% or more of the total taxes collected. And so those industries, there's over 6,000, I believe, taxpayers on the business side, but those industries, the larger ones, have been performing okay. This is even accounting for the significant decline in the meals and rooms decrease as a result of the current COVID pandemic, which is, I think that's still something in 21 to keep an eye on, because they'll probably miss plan to the 25% range potentially for meals and rooms, depending on when everything goes back to closer to normal, I should say, which I think DRA yesterday was talking about. Hopefully with a vaccine in the warmer weather, hopefully in April, there'll be a rebound back to kind of a typical year for meals and rooms. So for November, 44.3, that's a positive variance. And so that this will start to decrease your deficit as we go through the schedule. Budget appropriations from the budget, $2,757.3 million. Estimated lapse at 75.4, which was higher than the approximately 56.7 for 20, because it is the second year of the biennium. Those are the numbers that I know the governor's office and administrative services are keeping an eye on. I know there are targets, lapse targets of 75.4, but at the same time, the executive branch does recognize with the revenues and the carry forward deficit from 20 that there will be additional lapse needed to basically balance by the end of the biennium. So we will, any updates we get, I know an email just went out earlier this week, I believe, to agencies to the new budget director, Matt Mayo, who took over for Max Zellum. So Matt's working with the agencies now on a case-by-case basis to kind of start to that discussion on lapse to see like where we are, where we could be at the end of 21. And then I just included on here the HHS back of the budget from 20, the 12.5. And that's because of even though HHS, I think, reached out to Senator D'Alessandro at Fiscal, they had said they met their back of the budget. There's no, from the comptroller standpoint, there was no document provided to them like a write-down, so-called write-down of appropriations that informed them that the back of the budget reduction was made. So just for now, and just to keep the discussion open until we do find further clarification from the Department of Health and Human Services, it's going to keep it on there as a positive 12.5. Reason it's positive is because still in statute or in chapter law is a requirement for HHS to reduce their budget by 25 over the biennium. So that's a number that could swing and go away. But for now, we're going to keep it on there just to keep the discussion open. Statutory and fiscal appropriations. There are various appropriations that happen throughout the year that the budget writers do not assume, typically do not assume when they're writing their budget for the next biennium. Historically, you have items like the Department of Justice can come in for litigation, which they did to fiscal in the tune of almost $1.8 million of additional general funds at the, I think it was the November meeting. And then you have corrections can come in. They haven't come in yet, but corrections can always come in for any overtime expenses or any health related or prescription expenses. So that's something to keep an eye on. They do have the ability to ask fiscal committee for those funds. And as Senator Morse had mentioned earlier, DOC typically doesn't lapse a large amount, although they do have vacancies with the corrections officers. Historically, they do not lapse large amounts or even close to the percentage of the statewide percentage because of these additional costs for healthcare and prescription drug costs, as well as overtime. So, and then statutory appropriations, things such as Attorney General settlements. You could have statutory retirement payments for the constitutional officers. Another large one is the abandoned property claims, because although the state does bring in tens of millions of dollars from abandoned property claims, or from the so-called escheatment of those abandoned property claims, there are requests to pay back some of that abandoned property throughout a fiscal year. And so that is a hit on, because the revenue is deposited into the general fund, that is a hit on general fund expenditure. So through last month, you're at right around 2.8. I put $3 million for the schedule because it does vary. But we'll get to it a little later on in the schedule and what to expect. But with those positive items, and when I say positive for now until clarified, it is a $9.5 million positive variance from the budget appropriations that were discussed back in September of 19. Two of those items together, the current year balance at about 53.8. Again, just a snapshot. This will change the minute this meeting ends, and the minute we start to find out additional information. But it does at 53.8 with a cumulative, it's a positive variance. So it brings down your 54.4 or your 81.5 variance down to still a deficit of almost 26.5 million for the current fiscal year. And so you're still in a negative position. You're better. You're in a positive when you look at the variance, but you are in a cumulative ending balance of 26.5. What happens then is, because it is the end of the biennium, unless the statute is suspended, there would be a potential transfer from the rainy day fund. And as you know, the House and Senate Finance Committees and the governor will have this discussion when developing the next budget. There is a opportunity to draw any deficit from the rainy day fund, which has a balance of about $115.5 million. So that could, the legislature, as you know, though, could suspend that provision and may not draw anything from the rainy day fund. It's up to them. And the reason I say that is there is a possibility to end the year in a negative position. And as long as the 22 and 23 budget is balanced, including taking care of that deficit, then you do meet the requirements of the statutory requirements for a balanced budget from the legislature. But for the purposes of the schedule, it is assumed, just for presentation purposes, that any deficit would be made up for the rainy day fund. If you do take $126.5 million out of the rainy day fund, it would leave a balance of about 89 million. So that is a swing of about 27 million, but there are a lot of potential issues to keep an eye on. 12.5 million, as I said, for HHS back of the budget, just clarification from the department working in consultation with the comptroller's office to settle that, but also watch list items. You've heard from DRA yesterday, and you heard they had high estimates and low estimates based on the taxes that they collect, your business, your meals and rooms being the two largest. So from their high estimate for DRA, they're thinking $16 million to the positive, and a low estimate on their schedule is about $56 million to the negative. But another thing to take into account is that that's on a cash basis. There is, as I mentioned before, $30 million of 21 funds that have been moved back to 20. So although it did assist with the closing balance of 20, it would be a hit against any balance or revenue balance in 21. Non-DRA revenue estimates, these are from House Ways and Means discussions back in November from agencies. You do have an additional $20 million potential shortfall for 21. So if you just adding those two, you're at a 76. If you count the $30 million that will move back, close to $100 million potential revenue deficit at the end of the year. And right now, for the purposes of this schedule, you're just assuming your year-to-date 44 million over. So that will be a big swing for the legislature and the governor to account for. It's not as high as the $250 to $300 million shortfall that was predicted or estimated back in the spring, because the business taxes has performed better than anticipated for many reasons. The industries, yes, but you're going to also have discussions with DRA relative to the impact of the federal stimulus funds on individual business, including your Paycheck Protection Program that had an impact. We don't know what the impact is, but it could have had impact on some of your businesses because it is taxed. PPP is taxable under the BPT, BT, and So if they take it as a grant, although it's not taxable under federal law, it is subject to the state tax. So I think that's something when March and April, when DRA starts to see the returns and estimates come in, they'll get a better idea of how much is related to the PP. Significant amount of dollars came in through the Paycheck Protection Program, close to 2.6 billion, which is almost the size of our General and Education Trust Fund. So that could be helping with, as well as the industries, but some of those federal stimulus funds could be helping with some of the business tax collections not being as low as anticipated. Additional statutory fiscal appropriations, I have 8 million. You remember the $3 million we had up top just year to date. That's through the month of November. And a given year, it can be anywhere from $8 to $12 million of additional statutory and fiscal appropriations. Department of Justice came close to almost 2 million. They have come in so far at 1.8 million for litigation. Agencies such as the Judicial Council could come into fiscal committee to ask for additional funds. So these are assuming another 8 million would not be out of the picture, out of the ordinary. If you look at historical averages. Federal, state, and local coronavirus relief funds to be determined. There could be none, there could be some, and it could come in many forms. It could come with additional direct support from the federal government. It could come in with an additional FMAP from Medicaid or another measure. But that's just something that I know the governor is keeping an eye on, as well as the legislature on. Will there be any either direct state and local relief for the coronavirus relief funds or flexibility to allow for some general fund savings in other areas as a result of any coronavirus relief funds? Not something you can count on until it actually comes from Congress. Just has to come before June 30th, 21 for the state to be able to count that. So that will definitely be an issue discussed during the development of the 22 and 23 budget is what's happening with the current status of any coronavirus relief funds, if any, come in. Medicaid caseloads, to keep an eye on that. They have been up there close to 200,000, and that's an increased cost to HHS. How much, we don't know yet. That's something that will eventually make its way onto HHS's dashboard, which is really important for the state to keep an eye on. Yes, there is an additional FMAP for a portion of the year of the 6.2%, but will it be enough to offset any caseload increase and expenditure increase? Will it be more than and help them with any additional lapse? Statewide lapse variance, as I said, you have the governor's office currently working with agencies to on lapse targets based on vacancies, but also any other programs that are coming in under budget. So I know that there will be additional work on the executive branch this year to work with agencies to get that estimate on lapse. As I said, it typically in the second year of the biennium is higher than the first year, which has been reflected by, at least on the assumptions, going from 56.7 to the 75.4, but we know we're over $100 million lapsed in 20. So is this 75 going to at least hit that 103 or a higher number, especially considering where we are? So that's something that the additional detail we did request from administrative services on the agency by agency. So when we do provide that to the committee, you'll have an understanding of kind of where the big lapses came from. As Senator Moore said, not all from HHS. But there are some other agencies that were underspending. Some of that were over spending additional over appropriations, but over the assumed amount of lapse. So the lapse variance is big, and then legislative specials. Every year there could be an appropriation from the legislature. This year is no different. We'll see what happens through the process. There are emergencies that happen that may require additional general education trust funds. And I think that's, can't rule it out yet. During a budget year, typically what tries to happen is you try to put all the additional appropriations into the budget bill, either House Bill 1 or 2. But we will monitor as we go through the year, once the bills are introduced, how many appropriations are out there. So those are kind of the big areas to focus on. Revenue is going to be the big question.
Yeah.
I think you have the executive branch doing the best they can, controlling spending with their typical tools of your hiring freezes and unessential purchases. They have not come into fiscal yet to request budget reductions. And I think until we see what happens on the federal level and what's happening with the agency lapse level, we probably won't see anything come into fiscal for back of the budget, or sorry, for budget reductions at this point in the year. I mean, I could be wrong, but that's something as the governor's developing his budget for presentation on February 15th, any deficit that they assume 21, they're burying and ending, and they're going to have a plan that they present to the legislature on how to take care of that deficit by the end of the 22 and 23 biennium. And that's kind of where we are now. Unfortunately, there's a lot of unknowns. Even, I'd hesitate to look at December as far as business tax payments or state revenue, meals and rooms. You'll see the activity, obviously, of a decline in your hotels, your meals, et cetera. But for businesses, these are estimate payments. They may just pay their same estimates until they have a clearer picture of the fiscal year or their fiscal year transactions when their returns are due in April. And so, I think the 44, personally, it's too early to count that 44. I think that could go away pretty quickly once you get into the March and April timeframe. And the good thing for the Senate Finance Committee, not so good for the House Finance Committee, is by the time that comes, your March and April returns, that budget will be in the possession of Senate. So they will have up-to-date revenue estimates, which will then be your launching or your starting point for the 22 and 23 revenue estimates. We'll continue to monitor revenues. We'll continue to share any information we have on estimated lapses or any federal relief packages that are possibly coming. And we can update the schedule on a regular basis when that new information comes. So, and that's all I have for 21. But I can answer any questions you have relative to this if you'd like.
Mike, it's Senator Morse. I had asked Josh for a document, and I know most people don't put much into the maintenance budget. But I was wondering, when we get into January, if we could have a document that shows every department what was budgeted in general fund spend in 20 and what they actually hit in 20. And then I'm just curious, in 21, what was authorized and what is considered adjusted authorized in that maintenance budget to see where we believe we're going in 21 based on that maintenance budget. It's just a document that I've always studied because I look at the general fund spend only. You can look at both if you want, but I'm curious as to what every department did in 20. And then in 21, it looks like they've adjusted the numbers. I'm curious where they were going to be in the budget, based on what this document shows, and break it down by department. So
we can provide that to you, Senator. We do have, I will email it to the members after this. We do have a summary of the agency budget requests for general funds for actual 20 spending. The total is about $1.5 billion. It's just general fund. You just add another, not just, but you add another $1 billion for education trust fund. But from a general fund perspective, it's about 1.5 billion of what they spent. The 21 authorized, adjusted authorized, which is your past budget, as well as any additional legislation that has passed or fiscal committee or GNC actions. The total adjusted authorized on that date, it's usually in September, it was about $1.7 billion. And so the difference between 20 actual and 21 adjusted authorized is almost, 190, almost 200 million, not exactly.
Almost $200 million based on reading this.
Yeah.
Which if you go, if you check the total net appropriations from 21 compared to 20, they're pretty close on these two documents. So
yes,
that's why I'm curious.
Yes, and a big, big change. HHS, obviously, because it's one of the largest agency, they have $100+ million, almost 150 million of the variance between your 20 actual and your 21 adjusted authorized. And as you said, 20 and 21 budget amounts weren't that far off from each other. Education trust fund a little different because you did have some additional one-time funds in 21. But we can provide that document to you, Senator, and I will email the summary from admin services just so you have an idea, not only your actual 20 and 21, but also where the agencies, where their efficiency budget puts them, as well as any additional prioritized needs, because it is an increase. So,
Okay, if you don't mind, I'm gonna go to lunch.
okay, absolutely.
Take care, guys.
All right, bye,
Yeah,
Senator.
thank you.
Further questions from the committee?
Yeah, if I could, Senator, Mr. Chairman, Mike, the governor has, through his office, has targeted lapses. Are we going to find out what those targeted lapse numbers were for each department?
We will. It's just a matter of timing when we'll find out. And I mean that in all honesty. I think we can ask Matt and Charlie what those targets are, at least in the aggregate.
Right.
And then any additional detail, we will definitely ask for it. I just don't know how quick they'll be to share that. I know it's like your agency budget request, the numbers were changing as far as agency targets right up until the last minute, but we will make that request to see if we can get that information. So the committee will have an idea of that 75 or $74 million lapse, what they are at least trying to get to. So
I think that would be helpful. Also, Mike, we have some one-time litigations out there, and are we following those because we expect significant returns to the state? What's the progress of those litigations at this point?
yeah, and so we will the CAFR. Good thing of a nice portion of the CAFR is the status of all the litigation. I don't have dollar amounts, but at least they'll give you a status of all the outstanding litigation, to the good or bad,
Right.
state that could hit in the next within the next year or two. So I'll have that information. I can just forward when I forward you the CAFR when that's available. I'll make sure to point out the pages where you can find the status of all that litigation. Yeah.
And one further question, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Senator D'Alessandro.
Thank you, Mike. Were the additional auditors that were authorized in the budget, were they hired, or was a waiver granted to hire those people? Because they had a financial, there was a financial amount associated with those hires.
I don't know if all of them, I know some of them were hired. I don't know if all of them were hired, but I can check with Lindsay Stepp. I thought depending on the type of tax they were going to be auditing, I think they made their waivers request based on that. But I'll find out from DRA what the status of those new audit positions are, as well as any potential revenue that was either.
That was associated with their hires?
Yes.
Great.
That status.
Mike, do we track separately one-time expenses?
Typically, any one-time expense does make its way into House Bill 1 or 2. It is something that, yes, in the agency budget request, if it was a one-time expense in 20 or 21, you would not see that in the efficiency budget. I can reach out to admin services to see if they've identified all the one-time expenses. I think for the most part, a lot of that happened. It was almost $200 million of one-time appropriations in House Bill 2, which we can track the status of all those for you and provide that. But in addition, any one-time expenses in the executive branch or legislative or judicial branch, any one-time expenses that occurred in 20 or 21 that will not occur in 22 and 23, we can try to track that down for you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Second. Any questions?
No.
So I don't see any right now, unless somebody hasn't unmuted themselves. So if there are no further questions, we will be adjourned.
Okay, Senator, and we will update the schedule if it's helpful for the committee. As we receive your monthly revenue focuses or any additional information, as well as the final CAFR numbers, if you'd like us to provide draft snapshots to the Senate Finance Committee on an ongoing basis, we can do that if you would like.
Good. See some nodding heads, so that would be good.
Thank you.
So do we have to do a roll call to adjourn?
Yes.
Okay,
Okay,
so I'll move to adjourn.
Second.
Senator Gaida moves to adjourn, that's seconded by Senator Rosenwald. And we'll call roll. Senator Gaida,
Yes.
Senator Hennessy,
Hennessy, yes.
Senator Rosenwald,
Yes.
Senator D'Alessandro,
Yes.
and Senator Daniels says yes. And I think that's it. Thank you very much, folks. Enjoy your day and stay safe.
But as